go.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm just getting the agenda. So this is the Agriculture Advisory Committee for the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District meeting today. And we would like to recognize that we are collectively on the unceded territories of all the First Nations, primarily the St'át'imc, within our regional boundaries. And I'd like to also add that we are actively trying to include the St'át'imc in communications, and we will address that in our meeting today. So as part of our land acknowledgement, this is a new thing for me. I like to say what we're actually doing towards that reconciliation piece, not just acknowledging the land. So the electronic meetings policy that I need to say is at the beginning of this committee meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Any comments made during this meeting will form part of the public record. Public viewing of the meeting is also available in the SLRD boardroom in Pepperton. This meeting is being held virtually with some or all meeting participants attending via electronic or other communication facilities. A, committee members will be involved in and participate in the meeting. B, committee members will raise their hands to advise the chair they wish to speak. The chair will record the order in which the hands are raised and will allow the committee members to speak in the order in which they're recorded. If committee members are unable to raise their hands due to being in audio mode, they will verbally advise the chair of their intention to speak. C, all meeting attendees should remain muted when not speaking. D, with respect to a vote, committee members are only required to state a nay vote, i.e. members are not required to voice a yay vote. E, committee members attending the meeting are required to verbally advise the chair or the staff liaison if they leave the meeting and when they return to the meeting, so that this can be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. F, committee members will email the staff liaison if they have a technical difficulty with their connection and need to be reconnected to the meeting. G, if a technical difficulty occurs resulting in the meeting not being projected on the wall display in the SLRD boardroom, the meeting will be recessed until the projection is reestablished. H, if a technical difficulty occurs and it becomes apparent that a committee member has become disconnected from the meeting and the meeting's quorum is not maintained, the meeting will be recessed until the committee member returns to the meeting. I, committee members who are attending electronically and declare a conflict of interest in respect of an agenda item will be placed in the virtual waiting room by the staff liaison while the committee considers the agenda item. And J, finally, committee members who are present within the virtual waiting room are asked to stay at their computer or otherwise remain present and connected to the computer so as not to miss their readmittance into the virtual meeting room following consideration of the agenda item. Whew, all right. That is all done. Okay, so next I just want to review the agenda as it is. And I already have one, I let everyone know that I would like to make one change to the agenda moving forward, and that is to not discuss the OCP amendment bylaw referral today, but to put that forward to another meeting. So that piece will not be reviewed today. Does anyone have any? I'd like to put that motion forward, actually. Is there any discussion? Go ahead, Claire.
Can I ask a point of clarification? Just wanted to know from the committees, if this agenda change revision is approved, would you like staff to speak to that in the staff presentation, or just like full stop at the zoning bylaw slides and not get into the OCP aspect at all?
I can let you know that what I'd like to understand is only, so full stop at the presentation, and I'd like to only know, basically be introduced to the topic. So here is the OCP information that you feel free to read before next time we meet, but what is the process? So I want to know, it's just an outline of like when this will be discussed or what the process and the goals are for the board and starting this process. Because it's too much to review, in my opinion, for this meeting.
Sure. So I wonder if maybe Brenda can speak to just some like those high level slides of what the OCP piece is about, and we can come back for input and comments at a later date. Just sort of, does that make sense?
No, I don't even want to do that.
Yeah.
Truthfully, I'd like to move it all to the next meeting. Alls I want to know is just point of process. So it's just going to take too much time to go over that. Sue, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, yeah, I had a question regarding that though, that I was going to bring up, which is if that OCP process is about subdivision of agricultural land, then I would really like to see an analysis of how many parcels of what size we have now and what that looks like if they get subdivided out. Because without that, I don't know how you plan what's allowable. And I haven't seen it. I keep asking for it. And it makes sense before we review that OCP to have that information so we can make a real decision.
Okay, if you could park that question, and that to me is diving into the topic quite deep, actually. Yeah.
Except that if we're going to discuss it until next meeting, then making the request next meeting doesn't make any sense.
Okay, I hear you. Okay, so basically what we can do is we can understand the process. I was looking for timelines and the process piece of how the OCP is going to be reviewed and what they're asking of us. And then you can make that request at that time in the agenda. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and Bev?
Hi, I just wondered if there was any hindrance to this process for not actually discussing it today. So if we're not going to discuss it and the next meeting isn't until sort of January, February, March, is there a hindrance in terms of the process piece for the Squamish with the SLRD and this committee being able to provide that input?
Yeah, good question. Can I have Claire or Barb respond to that?
Yeah, I'll defer to Brenda because I'm not
Or Brenda, sorry,
to the
Brenda.
process piece and where the OCP amendment is at.
Sure, yeah. So it actually hasn't been referred to the AAC at this point. So it is just intended to be for information. It's still in early stages. So I have like a next step slide at the very end of my presentation. So maybe I'll just go over that at the end of the presentation rather than getting into kind of the content of the changes at this point. Does that work?
Yeah, that sounds good. So it sounds good if that we haven't formally been given that. So it means that we're still got lots of time, it sounds like, Bev, to make that input. Nice. Okay. So the motion is to defer this topic until our next meeting and to include in this agenda the next steps and process, and to understand the process for the OCP, and to allow for requests from the AAC that will come by way of a motion for information to prepare for the review. Does that capture it? Any more discussion on this? Okay, any opposed? Okay, thank you. So the next is approval of the minutes from June 7th. Go ahead, Sue. Or so wait, that was Bev. Did you have one more, or you're just taking your hand down? No,
sorry, I did have one more. So the review and approval of the agenda, I'm just wondering if I could add something for discussion.
Absolutely, go ahead.
So I just sort of wanted to understand, because I'm new, what the decision-making process is with respect to the referrals to interested parties in providing feedback back to the SLRD. So when I'm looking at who it was sent to, some of the stuff went to the Little Tribal Council, but Teatkit is not part of the Little Tribal Council anymore, so they weren't part of the process. If I'm looking at the maps, it does include Seton Portage, it includes Hacklip, Chisquila, Shekawash, like all of those bands. And I'm just sort of wondering how how that decision making is made with respect to who, how those referrals get to the interested parties, and how that decision has been made, if that makes sense as a question.
Yeah, definitely. It makes sense. So during the bylaw and when we go over just before we go over the actual content of the feedback that we received from the referrals, if we could park that question under the bylaws before we go forward with the actual bylaw information that we're being presented today. So just as a note, and if people were with us, some of you weren't with us, but basically we approved this bylaw in its last form. And if there were any major changes that were being suggested towards the board from staff, we were asked to have that version presented to us, and hence the reason why we're getting this information back to us. Vivian ensured that we would see these different recommendations. Sue, you had something about the agenda?
No, not me.
Oh no, Stefan, it's a different S. Go ahead, Stefan.
Sorry. I just don't recall anyone seconding your motion.
Oh, thank you. I'm trying to plow through this way too fast, aren't I? So do I have a seconder?
We'll gladly second. Yeah.
Thank you, Stefan. All right. And then I think I'll just quickly go through that again. Is there any emotions against for the agenda as I've motioned for a tiny change? All right, we're all good. Okay, thanks. Okay, moving to the next topic then, review and approval of the minutes from June. Did everyone have a chance to review these? I've already reviewed and given feedback already. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Move.
Thank you, Rolf, and a seconder.
I'll second.
Thanks, Sue. Any opposition? Okay, thank you. The next topic is business arising from the minutes. The action for me to connect with the Statlium over potential for joint food and agriculture updates, and then Claire to support. We've had no time to do that over the summer. We'll just continue working on this throughout the winter time. And as an aside, if there's any information that committee members have about projects that are happening within the Statlium communities, if they could email me and Claire offline so that we can follow up directly. And any questions about that action? Okay. And then the other was for LAFs to explore capacity to facilitate and coordinate the first wildlife agriculture meeting targeted for spring 2021. So there has been some changeover in staff with LAFs, and there was some talk about, and I know with my hat with Elris, with collaboration to host a meeting with wildlife, and this didn't happen in the spring. It was sort of talk to happen in the fall, and now probably what we'll do is have to defer, and I'll talk to LAFs about doing this in the springtime. Sue, do you have a comment?
Yeah, we got as far as having a date and having everything ready to go, but it conflicted with a whole bunch of other stuff happening in the community at that time. And so we had to postpone it, and then rescheduling started to not make sense because now we're past the bear season, so which was a primary focus. So it's probably spring now.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, that would be great. I don't think this is the place for it, but we at this time don't have, we have LAF's representation on the board, on our AAC due to directors crossover. So Sue, Rolf, Misha, yes. Mandy, no, not Misha. Okay, sorry. Mandy. So it would be helpful if there's anything LAF's related as we move along, to be able to, just keep that hat in mind. But I'd also like to know if there's any updates you can let me know about staffing and such. I know that Jana Pike is helping you guys out in the meantime. Okay, any questions about the LAFS wildlife meeting? This is a specific, just so you guys know. Oh, and there's there's Sarah. Yay. Hi, Sarah. Good. Go ahead. You can
Hi.
speak up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, I'm still here, and I'm still working for LAFS. So as kind of an assistant and helping to hopefully hire a new executive director. So that's the update for now. But if you're emailing LAFS, I am the one that's behind the inbox again. So
Okay. Okay. Good to know. Okay. Thanks, Sarah. So also to the wildlife agriculture meeting with that is actually a specific it's a goal that's on the agriculture plan. So it's one of those things that we keep marching forward with our ag plan. Alrighty. I am at 10:17, so I'm going to carry on. And the next portion is the Area B zoning and the zoning piece. And I'm going to pass that over to Brenda. There are some specific referrals that went out. But before we go into the actual pieces that she'd like to review with us, perhaps staff can address Bev's question about referrals.
Brenda, I'll let you speak to referrals. I haven't been involved with this bylaw. I'm just here to facilitate the meeting piece. And just confirming, Brenda, I think you should be able to share your screen now for the presentation too.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Sorry, can you just clarify again? Were you talking about referral specific to this zoning amendment or just in general, the referral process?
I think
was
just
this
in
one.
general.
Oh,
Just in
okay.
general.
All right.
Well,
Okay.
it is this one specifically, but it's also sort of in general. So if I'm looking at maps and I'm looking at the encompassment of area B and where this respective First Nations communities are, my understanding with the nations is that they don't speak for one another. So I'm just wondering or worried that somebody's going to miss something if we're only sending it to the Lillooet Tribal Council, the Papegula Council. TICKIT is no longer involved with the Lillooet Tribal Council, so you know, they have a huge garden this year and looking at sustainability of food sourcing, and so I'm just sort of wondering how that referral process is made, and is there a template for that, and does it just go out to everybody, or is it just different with each with each proposal?
Yeah, so as far as I know, and I'm still quite new to the SLRD, as far as I know, we have a template for each area, and we have specific agencies that it's sent to. So I'm not sure which First Nations specifically it was sent to. I think there was 2. I'd have to look back at the
Yeah, and
report.
I'll just jump in here, Bev. You know, that's a good, we'll take that back, and we may need to, as an organization, look at our referral contacts again if there have been some changes, and I think that's a really important point to bring forward. Neither Brenda and I were involved with this referral, so we can't speak to, you know, if there was a decision process there, but we should go and just double you know, check in on our referral agencies and contacts and whatnot, because the intention is for all the Northern Statlian Nation to be included in that referral, and it may be such that our information is outdated if there have been some sort of shifting dynamics over the last sort of year. So thank you for raising that. We can bring that forward, and we can kind of sort of check back in next meeting too with what we find out.
Great, thank you.
Do we need a motion to put that on? Yeah. So the motion would be to for staff to check the referral list, especially with regards to Indigenous communities, and report back to the AAC about who has been referred the bylaw. Can I have a seconder? Vivian, any opposed? Okay, thanks for raising that, Bev. I had the same concern as well, so I'm glad you brought it up. I've kind of like plowed through for a minute, and I noticed a few, one face in particular that I don't recognize. I just wanted to quickly, I should have done this at the very beginning, my apologies, But Allison Fox, you're new, and Brenda are both new to the group here. And I just wanted to be able to say welcome, and maybe we could have a quick introduction. Allison, if you want to unmute and introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you. I'm Allison Fox. I work with the Strengthening Farming Program at the Ministry of Agriculture and Food. And so Claire invited me to come along to listen into your process here and answer any questions. So.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Allison. And Brenda can explain what your role is.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Brenda Kohlenbrander. I'm taking over for Alex, who was the planner previously working on the Area B zoning amendment bylaw and OCP updates that I'll be talking about. So yeah, I'm taking over basically all of Alex's files while she's on maternity leave.
Yeah, and just a point of interest, Brenda actually is coming to us from Kamloops, so she has a little bit of an understanding of our geographic region for sure. So I think this is a good time to segue right in. Brenda, if you want to share your screen, and we can go over some of these zoning things.
Sure. Can you all see that? Perfect. Okay, so I'll try to go through these kind of quickly. And I'm not sure, Jackie, maybe before I get started, I'll just confirm. Do you want me to go over kind of all of the updates and then do discussion at the end, or should we kind of do that throughout?
No, I think as we discussed previously, we need to do it throughout. So we'll go over the ones, basically, just so everyone knows, I had a pre-meeting with Claire and Brenda to review these zoning amendments and the differences that the staff is bringing forward. You're going to see a repeat in what we've already discussed, but definitely what we've done is prioritized a few of them that were going to be, or at least staff recommended for changes. And then the other ones that didn't require any changes are sort of lower down on this presentation so that they'll be quicker to go through. So yeah, so I just wanted to be able to present the information and then discuss and then make any motions necessary and then go on to the next one.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, so like we've already kind of discussed, the main purpose here is to just bring this back because there was some kind of changes that came out of the referral process. So this went back to the board for consideration in September. And the direction we received from board was to bring it back to the AAC. And I think it was also a direction from the previous AAC meeting where you discussed this, that it come back if there was any major changes proposed. So that's why we're bringing it back today. So I'll just get started. Yeah, so we're just going to skip part 2, but part 1 will be to discuss the proposed zoning changes. And then part 3 will be kind of a next steps on what's going to happen with the zoning amendment bylaw, and then also with the OCP amendments. So again, this is looking specifically at the comments we received from the Ministry of Agriculture and Food and the ALC. So I've broken it down by topic. This largely mirrors what Alex had in her report. So if you had time to review the agenda package before this, then you've probably kind of seen some of this already. So the first one that we wanted to discuss is farm status for secondary residences. So what we heard from the Ministry of Agriculture is that they actually no longer require farm status for secondary residences under the new ALC Act. So that is a change that came about in December of last year. So the ministry did note that local governments can choose to be more restrictive if they choose to do so. So this middle column is just explaining kind of where you left off with the recommendation at your last meeting, and then the kind of resulting bylaw from after that. So the bylaw at first reading basically is what the middle column is discussing. So in that iteration, we had removed farm status for secondary residences based on AAC input. And we had also included that minimum parcel size requirement of over 4 hectares for an additional farm residence. So as staff, we kind of looked at these comments and what exists right now in the zoning bylaw. So currently or historically that we have required farm status for secondary residences on ALR land. So staff are recommending to revise the bylaw to require that farm status once again. We do feel that that's kind of the last protection we have for farmland since the ALC has removed that requirement for an application. So yeah, we feel that it's important to kind of keep that. And we'd also like to maintain that for consistency with the approach that we're taking in other electoral areas. So I'm going to open it up for discussion on this topic.
Sue Singer, you have your hand up.
Hi, so I'm not entirely clear what we're doing here today. So if I am extremely frustrated on this one. So if the ministries has removed the restriction and the AAC has said, we don't need this restriction, keeping it because you want to be consistent with a different area doesn't serve area B. And we already have protections in place on farmland. The secondary residence is an extremely important thing. They're tiny, they're not allowed to be big. There's all sorts of rules around them. So I don't understand why the SLRD made this decision. And I don't know what our purpose here is today, but I would strongly like to see this go with the AAC and ministry.
Thank you. So there are going to be basically the first, I think, 3 of these review are things that we've already decided and the staff is recommending something different. And so we, in my opinion, we're reviewing based on any new information the staff is giving us. And if there is any need for us to change our recommendation. And if there isn't, then we make a motion to carry on with our same. So there, it may be very short.
Okay,
Anyway.
I definitely want to stick with our original recommendation and express extreme frustration over the reasons they're giving for not following our recommendation. We need to tailor the agriculture zoning changes to make area B work well, and this is an important part.
Thank you, Sue.
And I just wanted to jump in really quick on the process piece too. So I think really where we may end up on some pieces of this, like we're not, staff are not trying to, we want to bring forward the recommendations and it's going to be it may be a board decision on some of these things and where there may be difference in perspectives and that's fine. And we want to be able to bring forward the AAC recommendation. And if it's the same or different than staff recommendation, this is basically an opportunity for the AAC once again to say, hey, do we want to stay with where we were at prior to the first reading referral, or do we want to make a change? And there's a few different topics, and this one I'm not surprised. We're not surprised. We still need to bring it forward so that you're aware that staff may be putting forward a different perspective. We're not saying the AAC should change their perspective at all. This is just an open discussion.
Thanks, Claire. Rolf?
I would like to make a motion. Motion reads, Area B, Agricultural Advisory Committee understands that the ALC Act use regulation does not require farm status for secondary residences. And based on that, the Area B AAC did not and continues not to support adding the farm status requirement to the Area B.
I haven't been over to the hay shed yet, so I got the chicken.
Hey, Mandy, I just need to have you on mute for some, oh, there she goes. Okay.
Okay. I'll start over. Area B, Agricultural Advisory Committee understands that the ALC Act use regulation does not require farm status for secondary residences. And based on that, the Area B Agricultural Advisory Committee did not and continues not to support adding the farm status requirement to the Area B zoning amendment bylaw number 1752-2022.
Thank you, Ralph. Do we have any discussion on this? Do we have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Thanks, Bev. Are there any opposed? Okay, hearing none. So the only concern I have is that and I would like to ensure that, I mean, we've given our conditions and our criteria for not having farm status, and that we also have conditions. There are minimum parcel size, there's other things. Is there anyone else? I would like to ensure that when the board receives our recommendations, that our criteria that we've put forward is also given to the board, that it doesn't just have our motion, but it also has our rationale behind it. And so this is something that's important to us going forward. If staff is going to recommend something different, I want equally their rationale and our rationale to be presented. Is that something that how can that happen? And then I know I have Sue who wants to make a comment. Because Claire, you know, and you definitely recognize when we met separately that we've had a lot of conversation on this, and we've had we're very strong. We have consensus over this.
Yeah, and just so I can appreciate the frustration, we took 2 meetings working on this item, and so we're just bringing, like, the point was just bringing this back because there were SRDs as a full body staff had some different perspectives, and wanted to make sure the AAC was aware that the SRD staff may not be aligned with the AAC recommendation, like full respect where the AAC is coming from, and that it will be ultimately a board decision on this item. But I also just wanted to acknowledge that we had 2 meetings working on and to get consensus on this item. So I'm not expecting there to be a change here at all, just from a process perspective. And absolutely staff can commit, and I can work with Brenda because I've been at these meetings to ensure that the rationale piece is carried forward when this goes back to the board. So that's something I can support Brenda with, because I have been just working as a staff liaison with the AAC, not necessarily on this bylaw project, but I can support that rationale piece.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you so much. Sue?
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. I think you nailed it. That's my concern as well, is when you look at the table, we don't have our rationale clearly in there. So it would be really useful to have it explained in our box as well. If people are doing a side-by-side comparison, then our rationale needs to be there as well. I'm concerned about not having our views represented. If staff are going to go against them, then how else are we going to be sure that the SLR, that the AAC's views are being equally presented if they're not recorded on paper? So thanks.
Can there be a motion that with this recommendation from the AAC, when it goes forward, that it is not just include, the motion isn't included, that includes the rationale, and that would be an action as, yeah, do we need to make a motion for that to be prepared by the staff? Does that make sense? I don't know how, or whether that's just something that's part of your job and you do anyways. Like, I have hands coming up. So Sue, do you still have your hand up? Or,
Sorry, no, I just didn't
okay.
take it down, sorry.
Yep, Rolf, go ahead.
Yeah, what I think would be the best approach for the AAC is, instead of, and with no disrespect to staff, but the way that I see that we can communicate to the board is by making very inclusive motions, and they may become very elaborate and very long, but maybe what we need to do, if that's a possibility, is to amend the motion that I made to incorporate the rationale that underpins the recommendation from the AAC. So the more that we put in the motion, because they will see every motion that we make.
I think it's just a matter of process and what you think is going to work. And I'm going to defer to Claire and Brenda. What do you think?
I mean, I was actually going to defer to the AAC. I think I'm committing to ensuring that the rationale. We can also, try and work at that as like sort of an outcome document that is shared with, say, the chair before we bring it, just to make sure that we've captured the rationale fully, so we don't have to, or maybe we want to work through that and have a solid rationale with the full committee. So this is where I'm gonna, I think it's at the committee's direction, whether you would like staff to take a crack at that and it go back to the chair to review and confirm we've got the rationale, or whether you want to do that as a full committee. I think those might be the two options, but also open if there's other ideas.
I'm happy to be the point person and then go and then just make sure that I've got a few of the key committee members. But if committee members would like to see it when I feel like it's, in kind of the final stages, just to have a quick peek, I'm happy to include that as well. Do people have, go ahead, Vivian?
That sort of the latter process that you and Claire are talking about sounds pretty good to me. I was at a bit of a disadvantage at the table, not being able to remember all the rationales for the different points, but just knowing that some of the AAC decisions were being flipped, and that I was pretty confident that this AAC would not be happy with that and would like to understand it at the very least better. And so if we have those rationales provided with some of these decisions, and if Claire and Jackie sort of prepare that final document for the board, that makes my level of confidence much higher. I'd be grateful for that. I do my best, but I can't represent the entire committee and all the expertise that you guys have there. So this is much better. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian. Go ahead, Sue.
I think the second process, my concern, Ralph, is if we go to really elaborate motions, then they become harder to understand. So my thinking would be to keep the motions very clean and clear and then provide the rationale with them. And then it's about a process in terms of making sure those rationales appear so that they support Vivian at the table.
Okay, so I think at this point, maybe what we'll say is I would like to put forward a motion that staff prepares rationales for the recommendations that we're putting forward for the bylaw. But let's be specific about the ones that are different than perhaps the ones that the staff are recommending. So it will be small. That way, at least the board in our minutes can also see that we were asking for the rationale to go forward to them so that they could see basically our points next side by each by the staff's points and their recommendations, just so they have all the information to be able to make an informed decision. And okay, so does that make sense to have a motion like that? And can I have a seconder if it does?
Second.
Okay, thanks, Rolf. Any opposed? Okay, thanks very much. I think we can move on to the next item.
Okay, so the next topic we wanted to discuss is multiple agricultural zones. And you'll see, I think in the version of the presentation that you received, I think split zoning was the next one. I actually moved that to later in the presentation because we did make a change there. So I'll discuss that a bit later. But yeah, so this one is multiple agricultural zones. So the comments we received from the ALC is that it's kind of poor practice to have multiple agricultural zones. The intent is really to have one single agricultural zone with a large minimum lot size. It's really related to subdivision. The multiple agricultural zones that were proposed are all identical other than the minimum lot size. So where it really comes in is subdivision. So with the previous iteration of the bylaw, we did propose multiple agricultural zones. And that was based also on your input. So that was, sorry, I'm just going back here. Yeah, so to maintain that kind of minimum parcel size under the rural resource zoning. So the kind of issue with it is that subdivision wouldn't necessarily be approved by the ALC. So it's not supported at the provincial level. So it's a bit misleading to have these multiple agricultural zones that have smaller minimum parcel sizes where subdivision wouldn't actually be approved for agricultural land. So that's kind of where staff is coming from with this recommendation we're making. So we are recommending to revise it to one single agricultural zone with a minimum parcel size of 40 hectares. So yeah, I'll put that out for discussion again.
Go ahead, Rolf.
Thanks for the introduction to this. So you said in your introduction that there is no substantive or no difference between AGR 1, 2, 3, and 4 other than the minimum parcel size. So I just like to make sure that that's absolutely true. And the second question that I have is, what are the ramifications? Because there's a lot of agricultural properties that will be below your minimum lot size. So say that you have a 10-hectare parcel that is then zoned AGR, which has a minimum parcel size of 40 hectares. Like, how can you be zoned something if you don't meet your criteria? I mean, I'm curious how that legally, I guess, works or something.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess there's 2 points there. So yeah, that is correct. There's the only difference between the multiple zones that we're proposing is the minimum parcel size. So all of the uses are the same. There's no other changes there or no other differences. And the second part of that, the minimum lot size only comes into like it's really only a consideration at subdivision. So if we were to rezone parcels, regardless if they meet the lot size right now or not, it doesn't matter until they try to subdivide. Does that make sense?
Okay, I guess, yeah. I mean, you're gonna put a new zoning on a property even though it doesn't meet the requirements. So apparently the SLRD has the ability and the authority or the legal ability to put a zoning on a property if it doesn't meet the requirements. But then if the property owner wants to rezone or subdivide, then it must meet the requirements.
So all of the requirements do have to be met. It's just the minimum parcel size is really only a consideration for subdivision. It doesn't mean it's not meeting the zoning if a parcel isn't 40 hectares in size. It's only something that's looked at subdivision.
Yeah, we have cases like that across the province where say something was subdivided 50 years ago when MOTI wasn't concerned about, you know, proving out water on smaller lots or something. And we have tiny lots that nowadays wouldn't be supported, but they are still zoned something that has a much larger parcel size. So that's pretty common across the SLRD. And I think, you know, I hear what you're saying. Is that an issue? The parcel sizes that the properties have now are sort of grandfathered in, as Brenda mentioned. It's just that if someone has a property that's zoned like, or that is not zoned, but it is 10 hectares, and we keep the multiple zones, and they think that they can, you know, apply for a subdivision, and they can apply for a subdivision. It's just misleading, because what we're hearing from the province is that they're not looking to be supporting subdivisions. So that's why they're saying, you know, your zoning should really be just having one agricultural zone that has a large minimum parcel size, because they're not in, you know, supporting subdivision, especially at those smaller levels. But yeah, it's totally, we'll leave open back up to the floor and here, but just the precedent, and we have that all over the SRD, where the current planning practices are different than what was done in the past.
Sue, go ahead.
I'm confused because I remember spending an awful lot of time talking about the different things that were allowed on different sizes of properties. So, you know, whether you could have a secondary house, what kinds of agritourism or various things on different sizes of property. So how is it that the only thing that's different is the subdivision piece? I'm not understanding this.
Yeah, I just want to throw in there too, I have you, Stefan, as well, but that it says also in the actual letter from the ALC that although zones are identical in terms of permitted uses, setbacks, the variable permitted minimum lot sizes may not be supportive of agriculture, and then nor is the commission compelled to follow the bylaws guidance when considering subdivision applications in these zones. So it to me also doesn't, at this current time, they're saying they aren't compelled to follow, but it doesn't negate the opportunity to apply, and nor does it predetermine that they're going to say no. And we also look as an AAC, and we're usually referred those situations on a case-by-case basis when subdivisions are reviewed. So go ahead, Stefan, did you have your hand up? Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I've answered my question in the meantime, sorry.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Sue.
No, I almost forgot what it was. Oh, I remember part of this was being brought about because the mapping is so bad for our area that people have slivers of ALR on their land. And according to this, then they would now be zoned entirely ALR. So I wonder what happens with the process, because I remember that was part of why we said to do the split zoning to begin with, because of this mapping problem.
Sorry, Sue.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I interrupt you? So the split zoning is actually a separate issue. So this is just talking about the agricultural zone. So having multiple agricultural zones versus having just one agricultural zone. So the split zoning is something we'll talk about later, but that's what you're talking about, Sue, with the, you know, if there's only a tiny piece of land in the ALR, whether or not that should be zoned agricultural.
Okay.
Yeah, that's going to be, that was confusing me at first too, was the two different, this is now seems connected, but two different issues. And for now, the subdivision piece to me isn't concrete enough in that referral. It just isn't concrete enough for us to recommend having one zone. Mind you, if we have the ability to still ask for my understanding was that at different lot sizes, we had different abilities to apply for subdivision. And if we didn't have the multiple sizes and the ability to apply for different types of, then it meant that one zone didn't make sense in that case. Because I thought the smaller it got, the less of the ability to subdivide. Like it had to be, there's a minimum parcel size to subdivide, especially in the ag zone. So to me, I don't have all the information. This one feels a little bit too, I don't feel confident enough to be able to make a decision. Does anyone else have any thoughts or on this topic at all? How can we get more information to be able to make this decision?
Well, I think the new information, like if we're going back to like the AAC did discuss this item, they did put forward a recommendation, or at some point we landed on that we're going to keep basically the rural minimum parcel sizes. We're going to continue forward. We're just going to call them agriculture. So that's and then the permitted uses are the same across all of the ag zones. So it's just the minimum parcel size. So it's really up to the AAC. Is the AAC concerned with having small minimum parcel sizes and the potential to see more subdivision applications come forward? Or maybe not more subdivision applications, but have subdivision applications come forward as a result. If so, just to play out the two scenarios, if you have a minimum parcel size of 40 hectares and someone wanted to subdivide, it would include rezoning to the SRD and a subdivision application to the ALC. If the minimum parcel sizes stayed as is currently, and there was 4 agriculture zones, you may not have that step of the rezoning to the SRD. That's probably the difference in process. You'd still have, there would still be that subdivision application to the ALC. I'm not sure if that makes sense or helps provide any further contextual information.
It does, Claire, because that means that doesn't it just mean less cost to the agriculture producers in that case, because they're not actually applying for rezoning to the SLRD? Potentially,
unless you saw that as they're probably not going to get supported, but that's totally up to their discretion. If they think that they have a good point, a good application to put forward, then they wouldn't have the whatever $2,000 rezoning fee.
Oh. Thank you. Go ahead, Stefan.
I was just going to bring in, previous recommendation from February 2019 that the Area B AAC recommends renaming the RR1, RR2, RR3 zones to AGR 1, 2, 3, rather than the proposed 2 zones under the draft bylaw, thereby clearly articulating that land in the ALR is for agricultural use, but maintaining the current minimum parcel sizes of 2 hectares, 8 hectares, and 40 hectares. So that I just wanted to bring in kind of how we got to where we are. Part of it, maybe that switch from RR to AGR. And I think maybe that was more what the focus was at that point in time, and not quite sure how we arrived at these different zones.
No, that's useful. Thanks, Stefan. I appreciate that history. It's been a long haul. So yeah, 2019 and we're at 2000. This is good context for Brenda as well. Go ahead, Sue.
Yeah, I don't understand how setting a 40 hectare parcel size helps us at all, because we don't have that many 100-acre places here. So I'm really concerned what that actually means for all the smaller places. The multiple levels made it clear, as Stefan just said, that there's different restrictions on the different sizes. So I don't get it.
Okay, it's sounding more and more that we are happy with our recommendation to stay as multiple zones, and that we had good rationale even in 2019. This is less cost to our agricultural producers potentially. Stefan, did you have another comment to make about this too?
And it might be more in the form of a question, but I think what staff is proposing is that they don't want to, correct me if I'm wrong. So this minimum parcel size has mostly to do with the subdivision applications, correct? So you don't want to not forbid someone from making an application for subdivision based on your bylaws, only to be met provincially with the fact that the ALC, remains in large parcel size land, and then to maybe be perceived to have been misleading people in your jurisdiction. Is that kind of, so if you don't express prohibit a subdivision at the 2 hectare level in your bylaws, then people may make applications based on that, and you have no grounds to deny that application at your door. You need to then carry it to the ALC, knowing not full well, but understanding that likely that wouldn't be permitted.
Yes, that's right.
That's correct.
Thank you for clarifying that, Stefan. Yeah, because it's really, this direction is coming from the ALC or these comments, and they are the ones that make that decision, that final decision about subdivision of ALR land. So if it's something that they're not going to support and they're saying to have this single zone with a large minimum lot size, then staff are just kind of wanting to go with that because it seems to make sense to not mislead people by having these smaller parcel sizes.
And just to confirm, so in all other respects, the tables describing the restrictions, permitted activities, GFA, total sizes are precisely the same. The only thing that changes in those three tables is the minimum lot size. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Sue Singer.
Thanks, Stefan. I think I understand it better.
So in this case, though, this would cause potentially that extra step of having to rezone again instead of it being zoned as is. Again, we have all of our most of the lots again in the SLR in our area are smaller lots anyways, like Sue says. So if no one sees any potential problems associating with only one zone, that we can still apply for subdivision potentially, then because this is what it says in the referral letter, it says it may mislead, and it's using language like may and could. So I just want to caution people also to understand that yes, the ALC often has a large view, and it's very driven by the Lower Mainland and large parcels that are not as mountainous as our region. But we need to ensure that it's we have as much flexibility for our producers as possible. But if one zone seems to make sense to the AAC, then then we need a motion. Go ahead, Stefan.
And I apologize, I know we need to move on to other things, but I have another question for staff as well. So would that, so if 40 hectare minimum parcel size was set, would that preclude moving boundaries within the ALR, as that is considered a subdivision application? So would small parcels say, oh, okay, well, this just makes sense given the mountainous terrain, we want to move boundaries? Would that prohibit smaller parcel sizes from making those kinds of applications?
That's a good question. Yes, I believe that would affect those types of boundary adjustments. I'm not sure, Claire, if you can provide more detail on that. Like, have you seen any applications like that from this area?
Yeah, and it would be, I think they're all fairly site specific, and it was just, you would kind of look to see, are you losing, is the overall sort of big picture being lost by adjusting boundaries and whatnot. But that may be a factor. That may be correct, that you would trigger the rezoning as well.
Okay, Rolf.
Other than the fact that it kind of relates to some of the split zoning conversation that's coming next.
Yeah, maybe a comment or question, but I'm struggling a little bit here with this this suggestion, in particularly in light of the fact that there's so many regional districts that go through the same process, and we, every time we sort of sit here and contemplate, we're starting from scratch, and I feel that there would be use in these cases to understand where what the best practices are among regional districts or municipalities, because there's it sort of seems like we're reinventing the wheel every time, and from what I can see with a quick sort of search is that other municipalities and districts are do not adhere to the 40 hectare. They're typically much smaller in the minimum lot size for agricultural or ALR zones, A1 zones in Peachland and Vernon, and the RDOS in the South Okanagan. They're all 12 hectares, so they're smaller. But like I said, that's just a very anecdotal sort of assessment, and I'm curious, I guess, towards staff too, like as you go through this process, are there associations that you go to where you swap out best practices and standards, or is this all done sort of in isolation?
Yeah, I can't answer exactly how Alex did her review, because I'm kind of coming into this kind of in the middle, but typically we do try to look at other similar local governments to see what they're doing. Because this is specifically to do with agricultural land, we do consider the Ministry of Agriculture and Food and the ALC to kind of be the best resources for best practices. So that's why we are kind of using their comments and trying to kind of rely on that pretty heavily.
Yeah, I wonder on that note, would it make sense to get any perspectives from Allison Fox, or sort of ministry rep on the call, who's a land use planner, Ministry of Agriculture and Food? Not sure if there's any.
Sure, go ahead, Allison, if you have some thoughts to provide us.
Sure. Yeah, I think our recommendation is typically in line with the ALC, that it should be as large as possible. It also depends on the type of agriculture that we're seeing in the region as to whether typically small lots are less farmable. They offer less options for types of agriculture that can occur. We do see a lot of smaller lots in the Okanagan. We've been pushing on those municipalities and regional districts to increase their minimum lot size as well. But we do have the situation where the type of agriculture happening in the Okanagan is typically very intensive tree fruit operations, or other types of intensive uses. So they can be quite profitable lots on these small lot sizes. Whereas if we're seeing, a lot of field crops, forage crops, and things like that, you typically do want to see a larger lot size, just because it's going to be a lot more difficult to be profitable on a smaller type of lot size. And I was just looking at a lot of the ALUI data that, and just sort of refresh my memory on that. But yeah, a lot of your forage and pasture fields are already kind of less than that 30 hectares. So there are already quite a lot of small lots in the area. So as this discussion is around, what would, do you want to try and encourage more subdivision when you've already got quite a few small lots? Or do you want to try and keep those large lots, which are a lot rarer? So that's typically how we're looking at it, and the perspective that we're coming from. And yeah, so I mean, that's why we're typically trying to make that recommendation that it should be as large as possible, especially where you've got a lot more extensive type land use, agricultural land use.
Thanks, Allison. Just a note too that we're quite similar in ecozone, or the most northern part of that sort of Okanagan type environment. So we're quite similar to, we have a lot of efficient small parcels doing a lot of intensive, but I'm going to leave I see Ralph, do you still have your hand up? You want to make another comment? And then I have Sue.
I do want to make a comment. I mean, I appreciate the ALCs and the Ministry of Agriculture and Foods perspectives. At the same time, those are policy setting bodies that have their own objectives and mandates. Regional districts across the province have, are more in tune with their constituents, and their constituents will indicate what kind of policies are in the best interest of the local circumstances. I think, generally I may agree with the ALC that bigger is better, but I think indeed if you look at the local circumstances in this area, then there may be rationales for choosing smaller, more farmable parcel sizes, so that a new farmer can actually afford to start, rather than having it sit fallow. And from an economist perspective, I think the ALC and Ministry of Agriculture would be wise to not only consider the use, but also the return per arable acre. And as you can see in the Okanagan, the returns, the economic benefit from the arable acres on the smaller parcel sizes are much higher than the larger plots, where you're looking at forage crops and whatnot. So ultimately, there's an economic interest in maximizing production of these parcels. And so with that in mind, I'm not really sure whether or not the 40 hectare would be the right size. I am, and just as a last note, I think I am convinced personally that, based on what staff is indicating, is that if there's no substantive change between the different zones, I'm comfortable by moving to one zone. I'm just not very comfortable moving to a 40 hectare zone.
Thanks, Ralph. Those are very good points. Sue Singer.
Yeah, this just continues to go back to what I keep asking for. How many parcels, what size? Because in my mind, it's absolutely critical to keep some 100 hectare parcels for the future. I'm sorry, you can't live on apples alone. And if we need to have local food security, that means including the production of forage and animals as part of it. And it's really hard to do that on tiny pieces. So from my perspective, what I see as viable for the future is a distribution of parcel sizes that keeps all of our agriculture opportunities open. That doesn't mean everything has to be 100 hectares, or 100 acres, but it also doesn't mean that everything should be 12 either. So understanding that distribution is really key for making good decisions. So I just wanted to put that out.
I'm just cognizant of the time, everyone. It is 10 after already. I was, this is what I anticipated, knowing that we'd have a lot of input. Do we need more information to be able to make this decision, or are we going to be able to put a motion forward today on this particular, this multiple zones question? Does anyone have any? All right. Okay, I think at this point, we need to be sort of cognizant of our time, and
Jackie?
yeah, go ahead, Sue.
I'm comfortable leaving our recommendation the way it was.
Okay, I am too, actually. Does anyone have go ahead, Misha. And then Mandy.
Yeah, I'm also comfortable leaving it the way it was, because although we don't have a lot of large pieces, the ones that we do, in my opinion, are the ones that are at the highest risk of subdivision and probably need to have potentially the strictest sort of subdivision negating policies around them. Because yeah, we don't have that many, and the ones that we do are very valuable as a result.
Thank you for that comment, Mandy.
I just wanted to say, I agree with Sue there. Like, you need to know what you currently have in the area in terms of parcel size before we can make any real recommendations. We need to know what we have, like how many small, how many large, the risks around them. So, yeah, I think we should leave it as the current recommendation until we have that information.
Okay. Based on what I'm hearing, it sounds like we would like to make a motion to leave our recommendation as it stands. And I think this will help our discussion, hopefully be able to go on to the next one, which is the split zoning. Do I have a seconder? Oh, Bev, did you want to make a comment before I?
I just wanted to reiterate what Mandy and Sue have both said about the mapping and ensuring that we actually have a you know, if we're looking at comparing apples to apples, we need to understand what we've got. And so I don't know if that could be part of this motion to put this forward, but also with a question or a motion to sort of ask when or if it's a feasible option to have this mapping up to date. I mean, I have to totally agree with that. You can't make a decision on multiple zoning and even splitting of properties if you don't actually understand what you've got, right? So I think that that's a critical sort of point in us being able to make decisions that are appropriate and are going to meet what we need to in the future.
Okay, thanks, Bev. I think that just strengthens my motion going forward, and also to the fact that we've already asked for an update for the land use inventory, and then being able to make those recommendations going forward about those slivers of ALR that are on properties and are due to historical mapping issues. So I'd like to recommend that the AAC moves forward. Basically, we're going to stay the same with the same recommendation as with the first reading. Did you have? I've got Mandy, Sue, and Bev. Do you all have more comments before I go forward? Or do I have a seconder on this one? Okay, Bev took her hand down. Mandy is probably still got her hand up. Sue, did you have some? Or no, Stefan's got the S.
Sorry about that.
That is
So in sending this back, I mean, so part of the discussion is kind of centered around agricultural productivity and potential on smaller parcel sizes. From the SLRD sort of staff standpoint, they don't want to be inundated with subdivision applications that may or may not be supported by the ALC. So it's kind of a difficult position for them, and to send them back with exactly what we started with, without sort of acknowledgement of our understanding that part of the reason that we want to send it back as is has more to do with the parcel size than anything else. I'm not sure if we want to incorporate that in some way.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. If we could add that to the rationale piece for sure going forward. I think that's important.
So just to clarify, so until there's a greater understanding of the current distribution of parcel sizes, am I getting that correct? Around the rationale, like you want to keep the 4 zones with the various parcel sizes until we have a better understanding of what the actual distribution of parcel sizes is?
I think that's part of it. And I think the other part of it is going to dovetail into our split zoning and the mapping changes that are also occurring. So I think it's just right now, best practice in my mind would to be leave it as is. In my professional opinion. I don't think that we're going to see a floodgate open also too of subdivision because we haven't already. So it's possible, but I don't want to create fixes for things that haven't happened yet. Unless we really see that, I mean, we do see people moving into the district of Lillooet from other areas, but we haven't seen a huge changeover in the SLRD Area B in the same way, in my opinion. Okay, 1117. Is there any more discussion on this piece, or can I have a seconder for my motion?
Yep,
Anybody? Okay, thanks, Stefan. Any opposed? Okay, that being said, we can move forward to the next item.
So sorry, there's one more before we talk about split zoning and the other two where no changes are proposed. So
Can we skip ahead, Al? Can we skip ahead? Just, yeah, let's go right to the split zoning because it makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, so the split zoning, we heard some concerns from the ministry that there could be up to 4 dwellings on a property where they're split zoned. So say there's agricultural zoning on one piece and I don't know, like another residential zone on the other piece that is an ALR. So their concern is that you could have 2 dwellings on the ALR piece and then another 2 dwellings, so 4 dwellings on a property. Because the way that the zone reads, or the way that the provision reads, that is that it's per zone, not per parcel, if that makes sense, for the number of dwellings. So they recommend basically what Sue was talking about earlier. Any ALR land is zoned agricultural. So regardless of how small of a piece is in the ALR, they would recommend that the entire property is zoned agricultural. So initially, we had proposed to say, like, if a property was less than 50% in the ALR, we would leave that split zone. And I think that was based on input from the AAC. So we were going to, so Jackie, you'll notice that this has changed. We were going to go with the ministry's recommendations to not have any split zoning, but we did discuss it a bit further with staff, and Jackie made some good points about concerns with doing that, because we know that there are parcels that have very small pieces that are in the ALR. And what does that mean if we zone the entire thing agricultural? So we are proposing to stick with that 50% or more, which become agricultural zone. So anything below 50% would have that split zone. So I'll open it up for discussion again.
So just to clarify, you're actually just going with the same recommendation as the AAC? Okay. So we don't,
yeah,
oh.
That's right. Yeah,
Okay.
so we were initially thinking about making changes based on the ministries and what they were saying, but it was kind of vague, their referral comments, and we do feel that we have to kind of look into that further before we make a change like that, because that is a pretty major thing to go and zone everything agricultural if there's only small pieces in the ALR. So yeah, we definitely recommend considering that in the future, once we kind of have had a chance to look into it more and see, if there are issues as a result of that split zoning, that might be something to revisit.
Okay, Rolf, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just I guess a question for process. If no changes are recommended, then there's really nothing, I think, for the AAC to do. I mean, there's no recommendation that follows. I mean, nothing changes. So I'm just curious when that staff would like to have something from the AAC other than, you know, sort of a that we've taken note that there's no change in the bylaw as it sits in its first or second reading. I forget where it sits.
Yeah, so the intent with these next ones, and that's why I left them for the end, is that we're not recommending any changes. So these are scenarios where the ministry or the AAC has made certain comments that maybe we should look at, you know, areas of the bylaw, and staff is actually recommending to keep it as is. So we're kind of going against what the ministry or the ALC is proposing. So we're just kind of putting it out there for information, so you are all aware that you know, these comments have been made. And yeah, just it's up to the AAC if you want to make a motion or just take this as information.
I think at this point, that's why we had, when we met before with you, that most of this stuff could just be taken as information. Really, it was because we knew we had such little time. That's why I flipped right to the split zoning, because when we talked before, there was a different recommendation from staff. So if it's the same, we can just take it as information and carry forward, unless you feel that it's important that we give it another motion. But I really just think it's fine, unless anybody else in the committee feels otherwise. I think we should flip back to the cannabis one where there has to be a change for definition. Is that okay, everyone? Okay. All right, we can go back to the other one.
Okay. Yeah, so with you would have seen this before, but basically, the ALC has made certain changes to the ALC Act, which has required us to now kind of separate agricultural cannabis production with like an industrial style cannabis production facility. So the intent really with these changes was to make that distinction. The comments that we received from the ALC were basically to say that we should revise this definition to kind of further clarify that distinction between agricultural cannabis production and like the industrial style cannabis production. So the way that, I can't remember the exact wording, but the way that the agricultural cannabis production definition read, it wasn't clear in the ALC's opinion that we can't prohibit it because it's now a farm use. So it's kind of just a minor change to ensure it's clear that it's that we can't prohibit it as a local government. And then the other comment they made was there's a specific section where we talk about restricting the size of cannabis production facilities. So that's the industrial style cannabis production on parcels under 100 hectares. So that does apply to agricultural zones. So that's why they made this comment. They just wanted us to clarify that it only applies to that industrial style. So in new concrete buildings, it doesn't apply to cannabis or agricultural cannabis production, because again, that's a farm use and we can't regulate that. So we can't restrict that with that size regulation. So our recommendation here is just to make those revisions as per the ALC's recommendations. So again, we'll still include that definition. We'll just clarify it so that it's clear it's separate from that industrial style cannabis production facility. And then we're still proposing that it's added as a permitted use in agricultural zones.
It's on page 97 of the full agenda package. That's in order of the pages. It's page 2 of 3 on the ALC letter. back to Alex McKay with SLOD. Go ahead, Rolf.
I'd like to make a motion. A motion is Area B, Agricultural Advisory Committee supports updating the definition of the agricultural cannabis production in the Area B zoning amendment bylaw number 1752-2022 as per ALC recommendations.
Thank you very much. Any more discussion? Can we have a seconder? Don't be shy.
I'll second that.
Thanks, Misha. Anyone opposed? Thank you, everyone. All right. We are at 11:27. Were there any more, Brenda, that were changes necessary for the bylaw?
No, the other two were just for information again.
Okay. I think I'd like to leave them for as people just to read them and unless there were specific things when people were preparing that had concerns, I'd like to just move forward to next steps. Any opposition to that? Okay, thank you.
So next steps with this zoning amendment bylaw will be to amend the draft bylaw with the updated recommendations. So we'll prepare it based on staff recommendations. We will bring it back to a future board meeting with that rationale from the AAC as we've discussed. And that will be for consideration of second reading. And then with the OCP, I'm not sure if we want to get into it too much, but basically the direction we received from the board was to bring it back to a future EAD meeting for discussion. So I'm not sure at what point that will be brought back to the EAD. And I'm not sure, Claire, do you know the process for how it's referred to the AAC? Does that usually come from a board direction? I'm not sure if we have a specific process.
Yes,
for
through
that.
the chair. So that would come like either the EAD or the board would make a motion to refer the bylaw to the AAC, and then we would have the opportunity to review and provide input.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, so if we do receive that direction from the board, then we will bring it back to the AAC before, I'm not sure at what point, so it might go for first reading first, or it might come to the AAC before first reading. And then after it receives first reading, it would go out for referral. So yeah, it would kind of depend on when in that process it's referred to the AAC.
Go ahead, Vivian.
I would do this at the board level or at the EAD meeting if necessary. I would ask for this to come to the AAC, and I may have done that already. Just, it makes sense to me for you guys to have a critical look at this as early in the process as possible, and try and minimize the amount of time and trouble you have to take on it. So that's how I would like it to be, and that's certainly what I'll work on at the board level.
Thanks, Vivian. Stefan, did you want to just, oh, okay, gotcha. Thanks for that. There's some information in the chat. So I thank you for that next steps, and I'm glad to hear that, yeah, we'll have an opportunity to look at the OCP. It does have agricultural implications, has things in there. And at this point, we don't have time to review the events bylaw. What is the expectation about that particular one? What is the timeline and the pressures there? Can staff give us an indication of, what we need to do?
I mean, I also am not super familiar with this bylaw. I'm not working on this project. I believe, Vivian, you can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but this has been to the board and it's the special event permit is being recommended for all the electoral areas. And, you know, I think it's being referred to the AACs as we're having meetings to see, is this something we want to see being introduced in Area B? But I'll let Director Birch Jones sort of provide some further context, please.
Thank you. I felt that, like with many things, that the special events bylaw, more than 10 events a year, and what's happening on ag land is causing some pressure. In particular, I think the Squamish Valley, Area D, and also there's a couple in Pemberton. And so they're trying to insert sort of some more control and regulation around special events in those areas. And I didn't think that it was a problem in Area B at this point in time. So I didn't feel that we necessarily wanted to introduce regulations to solve problems that we weren't having, essentially. But I mean, it's good. We know in the future, it's such a happy time that we have some of those problems that we can certainly borrow from Area C or D if we'd like to bring that bylaw in at that time. I didn't think it was necessary currently.
Okay, thanks for that context, Vivian. I have the same opinion about that at the current time with the events that we have going on here. I don't feel like there's that kind of pressure like we have in the southern parts of the SLRD. If it's as simple as that and the rest of the committee feels the same, that we could make a simple motion to say that the AAC does not recommend a bylaw for these special events at this time on ag land, I'd be happy to contemplate it right now, but we're already 3 minutes over. If there's more if there's more discussion to have, then I want it to be forwarded. So if there's any more discussion, but I think at this point I'm seeing some heads nodding. Do we need to have more discussion, or do I have a seconder?
I'll second that we don't do anything with the events that we don't have.
Thanks, Misha. Is there any more discussion, or do we have any opposition to this? Okay, we are so efficient. Thank you. All right. So going back to the main, our agenda, I believe with only 3 minutes over, we have accomplished our goals. Anything else from staff or any members at this point? Thank you very much for your time, everyone. I really appreciate it. Okay, I would like to make a motion to adjourn. And Misha seconds that. No, different one. Do you want to make? Yeah, you can make a comment if you like.
It was a really quick comment. So we had asked for this list. Like, it was several people asked for this list of all who's going to provide that list.
The rationale behind is that what you're talking about?
No, the list of the different zoning sizes so that we can make a decision.
Oh, so that will come. Basically, we're going to keep our recommendation the same, where we have basically the types of, they'll just transfer over to the ag zone, and we'll have multiple ag zones. And then in the future, we're going to start to look at the mapping and the different zones and all the rest of it in the future. So this will be something that happens as we look at things into the future. That's my understanding. Stefan, and then Rolf, and then Bev.
Just that, and I believe the list you were referring to, Misha, was the parcel sizes in the ALR in Area B. And if you look at the top of the chat, that leads to the land use inventory that I believe contains some of the information that we're looking for, but being from 2013, it may be out of date and may need some reworking. So
thanks.
just so we're not waiting for it.
if I might jump in, I think that's a really great, it does tie back to that conversation we've had about updating the ALUI, and that's sort of on our hopeful work plan. It's sort of been back burner because they weren't taking on any new applications while they were sort of working through pandemic things, but I'm hopeful that's something we can explore this next year. And Jackie, maybe we could have that as an action item so that we don't lose track of that, because it feels like maybe that's been some of the frustration too. So I'm happy to add that as an action item.
Please, thank you. Go ahead, Ralph.
Just I guess a note for everyone. While we may not change our recommendation to the SLRD board, the zoning bylaw will move forward, and it is staff can still continue with its recommendation with a single zone of 40 hectares. So it's not as if we decide today that we're going to keep the 4 zones. No, it's just a recommendation to the SLRD board. And so we don't make decisions, we just make recommendations to the SLRD. So we stick with our existing recommendation to the SLRD board, and staff will do its thing, and then the SLRD board will ultimately decide. So if we want to obtain some more information and update our recommendation, I'm not real sure what the process for that is, but there is a timeline here. So that just of note, and it is very well possible, and I suspect that staff will continue with their 1 zone 40 hectare, and that the SLRD board will, based on the ALC's recommendations, will adopt that. So like I said, we're a bit in a flux there, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, good points. Definitely. Thanks for stating that. It's good to review kind of the process, and I hear what you're saying. Absolutely. Thanks, Ralph. Did you have one last thing, Bev, or you put your hand down? You're good.
No, I just wanted to make sure that that was noted as an action. So Claire already mentioned it, just with respect to the mapping.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. All right. I think we have concluded our work here. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and have a lovely day. Did I get I got my motion to adjourn, did I? Someone, yes? Okay, good.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone's time. Thank you for chairing, Jackie.
No problem.
Nice to see
Yeah.
Thank you,
everyone.
Claire.
Okay.
Well
Thanks,
done,
Claire.
Jackie. Well done,
Thanks,
staff.
Brenda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see you all.